Beneath the iron-veined heart of Vargath, where moonlight clawed through cracks like a lover's desperate grasp, a queen's silence shattered the chains of presumption. Rowena Blackmore had long since learned to measure her breaths against the weight of betrayal, each one a quiet defiance in the suffocating dark. At 31, her body bore the map of a throne lost to treachery, scars like silver rivers across her back, etched by the very council that once knelt before her. They had called her dead, a ghost in the annals of the Iron City. Her reign ended not by blade but by whispers and poison. Now they dragged her from the shadowed cells beneath the forges, where the air tasted of rust and regret, and marched her toward the pit. The guards' boots echoed like thunder on the grated walkways, their grips iron on her arms, though she offered no resistance. Why fight the inevitable when the soul had already been exiled? Vargath sprawled above, a labyrinth of spiked spires and bellowing smokestacks, its underbelly a realm of perpetual twilight. The wind howled through the vents, carrying the distant clamor of hammers and the low, guttural snarls from below. Snow never fell here, not in the forge heart of the north, but the cold was a living thing, seeping from the stone walls, frosting her breath into fragile veils that dissolved like forgotten oaths. She wore a threadbare cloak, heavy with the grime of years unspoken, its hood pulled low to conceal the fractured crown nestled against her chest. It was no jewel of gold or gem, merely twisted iron, snapped during her fall, its jagged edges a reminder that sovereignty could break as easily as bone. Hidden beneath the fabric, it pressed against her skin, a talisman of what was stripped away. The sigils on her spine burned faintly, as if sensing the descent. Ancient marks of sovereign blood burned into her flesh by the Deuce's own hand, or so the old lunar rites claimed. They had called her Omega in hushed tones, a queen born of the moon's quiet fury, not the Alpha's roaring dominance. But power, they feared, was power, regardless of its form. The procession halted at the pit's edge, a yawning chasm carved into the bedrock, ringed by rusted railings that groaned under the weight of watchful eyes. Torches sputtered along the rim, their flames casting elongated shadows that danced like specters across the sheer drop. Below, the air thickened with the scent of damp earth and feral musk, mingled with the metallic tang of blood long dried. The pit of Mad Alphas, a graveyard for the broken kings of forgotten packs, where the deranged and the deposed were cast to devour one another in endless, ritualistic fury. No one survived it. No one emerged whole. "Into the void with you, Witch Queen," growled the lead guard, his voice a rasp honed by years of enforcing the council's will. He shoved her forward, the world tilting as she stumbled onto the precarious ledge. Her hands grasped the railing, cold biting into her palms, but she did not cry out. Instead, she lifted her gaze to the fractured ceiling far above, where slivers of moonlight pierced the gloom like arrows from the Deuce's bow. It bathed her face in silver, illuminating the hollows of her cheeks, the storm-gray eyes that had once commanded armies. They presumed her dead, yes, but death was a lie, they told themselves to sleep at night. Rowena had endured worse than this pit, the night her mate, the Alpha consort, had turned his blade upon her in the throne room, his eyes glazed with the council's venom. "For the pack," he had whispered, even as her blood pooled on the marble. She had crawled away, silent as a shadow, letting them believe the poison had claimed her. Years in the Undercity's fringes had honed her into something sharper, a blade tempered in isolation. Now they sought to erase her utterly, casting the presumed corpse into the jaws of madness to ensure no whisper of rebellion lingered. The guard's hand clamped her shoulder, propelling her over the edge. She fell, not in free tumble, but a controlled slide down the incline of scree and chain-laced stone, the cloak billowing like raven wings. The wind whipped her hair, carrying echoes of howls from the depths, primal, unhinged cries that vibrated through her bones. Her feet struck the uneven floor with a jolt that jarred her spine, the sigils flaring hot as if awakened. She rose slowly, dusting the grit from her knees, the broken crown a steady weight against her heart. The pit unfolded before her, a vast crater lit by sporadic shafts of moonlight and the dim glow of bioluminescent fungi clinging to the walls. Jagged outcrops rose like the teeth of some ancient beast, and in the shadows, eyes gleamed, yellow, feral, ringed with the red of unending rage. The mad alphas, remnants of fallen houses, their minds fractured by betrayal or curse, bodies marked by scars and manacles long broken. They circled now, emerging from crevices and hollows, their forms hulking silhouettes against the silvered light. Low growls rumbled through the air, a symphony of threat and hunger, their breath steaming in the chill. Rowena stood unarmed, her posture unyielding, though fear coiled in her gut like a serpent. Not fear of them, these tyrants reduced to beasts, but of the silence within her own soul. What was a queen without a crown, without a pack? The moonlight shifted, spilling across her back as a gust stirred her cloak, and she felt the sigils pulse, a warning or a promise. One alpha, broader than the rest, with fur-matted shoulders and eyes like molten iron, stepped closer, nostrils flaring to scent her. His lips peeled back in a snarl, revealing fangs stained with old blood. But as he lunged, the light caught her, illuminating the intricate patterns etched into her skin, symbols of the Deusa's lineage, sovereign and unyielding. He froze, mid-stride, a tremor rippling through his frame. The others halted, their growls fading into uncertain whines. Rowena met his gaze, her voice emerging soft yet resonant, carrying the weight of forgotten thrones. "I am no prey," she said, the words weaving through the air like smoke. "I am the echo you cannot silence." In that moment, as the circle tightened, not in attack, but in wary reverence, Rowena wondered if the pit was exile or the forge of something new. The wind howled above, and the moon watched, eternal witness to the unraveling of fates. The circle of shadows held its breath, the mad alpha's forms rigid in the silver spill of moonlight, their snarls dissolving into the hush of something ancient stirring. Rowena's heart thundered against the jagged iron of her crown, hidden still beneath the cloak's folds, but she did not flinch. The air in the pit hung heavy, laced with the sharp bite of stone and the musky undercurrent of restrained fury, as if the very walls exhaled the ghosts of battles long devoured. One by one, the hulking figures lowered their heads, not in submission born of weakness, but in the instinctive pull of recognition, their eyes flickering from rage to a wary gleam. The sigils on her spine warmed like embers beneath her skin, a quiet affirmation that the Deusa's mark was no mere scar, but a thread woven into the fabric of their fractured world. From the deepest recess, where the fungi's glow painted the rock in ethereal blues, a figure emerged, not with the lumbering gait of the others, but with a deliberate grace that belied the chains of madness. He was taller, his frame corded with muscle scarred by claw and flame, his fur a mottled gray streaked with the white of old frostbite. Eyes like storm clouds met hers, not feral but haunted, carrying the weight of a crown he had never worn yet, could not escape. Thorn Blackthorn, once the shadowed enforcer of Vargath's outer packs, whispered of in the Undercity's taverns as the cursed exile. Banished for a mercy he had shown, a rival alpha spared in the heat of war, only to return with betrayal that shattered his kin. Guilt had carved him hollow, the Deusa's curse twisting his mind into nights of unrelenting visions, driving him into this pit where the mad could not judge the broken. He stepped forward, the others parting like mist before a gale, their whines fading into the drip of water from unseen crevices. Rowena's breath caught, the cold air searing her lungs as an instinctive pull tugged at her core, a Omega's echo to an Alpha's storm, raw and unbidden. It was no gentle warmth, but a spark in the void, born of shared exile, of thrones toppled by the same treacherous hands. Yet she denied it, shoving the sensation down like a blade into its sheath. Fear coiled first, sharp as the wind's howl through the vents above, whispering of traps in the dark. These were tyrants, after all, their sanity a fragile veil over savagery. Curiosity followed, a reluctant flame, wondering if his gaze held the map to her own unraveling. Thorn halted mere paces away, his nostrils flaring to draw in her scent. Jasmine crushed under iron, laced with the faint ozone of sovereign blood. The moonlight caught the silver cuff on his wrist, a remnant of royal chains, etched with lunar phases that mirrored her sigils. "You bear the mark," he murmured, his voice a gravel-low rumble that vibrated through the stone, carrying the timbre of one who had howled commands into blizzards. Not a question, but a revelation, as if the Deusa herself had scripted this convergence. His eyes traced the air above her back, seeing what the light had unveiled to the others. The intricate whorls of power, symbols of a lineage that predated Vargath's forges. Rowena's fingers tightened on the cloak's edge, the broken crown's points pricking her skin like accusations. "And you bear the curse," she replied, her tone steady, though her pulse betrayed the lie of calm. The words hung between them, a bridge of wary understanding amid the pit's oppressive chill. She had heard fragments of his tale in her years of hiding, the alpha who chose compassion over conquest, only to watch his pack burn for it. The council had marked him mad, casting him here to rot among the echoes of his failure. Now, in this underworld of jagged teeth and flickering light, their pains mirrored like reflections in frost-covered steel. He tilted his head, a low growl escaping not in threat but in the ache of recognition. The connection hummed, instinctive as the moon's pull on tides, drawing her toward the heat radiating from his form, a counterpoint to the pit's eternal winter. But she resisted, stepping back until her heel met a sharp outcrop, the pain grounding her. What folly to trust the beast in the pit when her own blood had turned against her. The Alpha Consort's blade still haunted her dreams, its whisper of, "for the pack," a poison that lingered. Thorn's presence stirred that wound, curiosity warring with the fear that this too was a cage disguised as kinship. Yet he did not advance. Instead, he knelt slowly, his broad shoulders bowing under an invisible yoke, the silver cuff glinting like a fallen star. The others followed suit, their forms a ring of shadowed loyalty, the air thickening with the scent of pine and earth from his fur, remnants of forests long lost. "The sigils call to the cursed," he said, his gaze never leaving hers, stormy depths holding a melancholy that pierced her defenses. "They whisper of redemption, not ruin." Rowena's chest tightened, the wind above moaning like distant weavos, carrying the faint clamor of Vargath's hammers, a reminder that the world above still plotted their erasure. In that suspended moment, as the moonlight waned behind a veil of iron-laced clouds, Rowena felt the first fracture in her isolation. Not love, not yet, but a thread of possibility, fragile as the fungi's glow. Fear and curiosity entwined, pulling her toward the enigma before her, even as her mind screamed of betrayal's bite. The pit, once a grave, now pulsed with unspoken alliance, the broken crown against her heart a silent vow. What strength lay in yielding to the pull, when mercy had felled greater kings? The question lingered, unanswered, as Thorn rose, extending a scarred hand, not in command, but in offering. And now, I invite you to leave a trace of your presence in the comments. Tell us where in the world you're watching from and the exact hour you hear this story. We wish to know how far these northern confessions travel, and at what moments of the night they find you. The hand extended like a branch in a storm-ravaged wood, scarred knuckles pale under the moon's indifferent gaze, and Rowena hesitated, the pit's chill seeping deeper into her marrow. Thorn's eyes held no demand, only the quiet storm of one who knew the cost of trust, his breath a visible plume that carried the faint wild scent of pine resin and smoldering ash, echoes of forests she had once ruled from afar. The other alphas remained knelt, their forms a silent bulwark against the encroaching shadows, but the air thrummed with tension, as if the Deusa herself paused to witness this fragile bridge. Rowena's fingers twitched beneath the cloak, brushing the broken crown's jagged edge, its iron bite a reminder that alliance could be as treacherous as solitude. Yet the sigils on her spine hummed warmer now, a subtle current urging her forward, weaving through the fear that clawed at her resolve. She placed her hand in his, the contact electric, a jolt of alpha heat against her omega chill, raw and unyielding, like flint striking steel in the void. His grip was firm, but not crushing, guiding her toward the deeper recesses where the fungi's blue luminescence painted the walls in spectral hues. The others rose fluidly, falling into step behind them, their footfalls muffled on the damp stone. A procession born not of conquest, but of shared exile. Whispers of wind funneled through the vents above, carrying the distant clang of Vargath's forges, a mechanical heartbeat that mocked the organic pulse of the pit below. Rowena's pulse raced in counterpoint, curiosity blooming amid the fear, her mind tracing the lines of his scars visible through the tatters of his hide vest, claw marks from battles unspoken, burns from flames that had consumed more than flesh. They moved into a cavernous hollow, its ceiling arched like the ribs of some colossal beast felled by time, where moonlight filtered through a narrow fissure, casting elongated shadows that danced like wary specters. Thorn released her hand, gesturing to a cluster of ragged firs piled against the wall, bedding scavenged from the pit's forgotten depths, softened by moss and the faint warmth of bodies long huddled here. "The Council's eyes reach even this far," he said, his voice low, threaded with the gravel of restrained thunder. "They send hunters when the moon waxes to cull what they deem unfit." He knelt by a makeshift fire pit, striking flint against steel. Sparks leaped like defiant stars, igniting dry lichen into a modest blaze. The flames crackled, painting his face in flickering gold and crimson, illuminating the hollows of cheeks gaunt from endless vigilance. Rowena lowered herself onto the furs, the broken crown shifting against her chest like a secret heartbeat, its weight both anchor and chain. Empathy stirred unbidden as she watched him, this alpha who moved with the deliberate care of one burdened by ghosts. His curse, she knew from undercity murmurs, was no mere madness but a lunar affliction. Visions that revealed truths too cruel for the waking world, driving him to mercy that the packs called weakness. "You spared a rival," she ventured, her words soft against the fire's snap, the sigils pulsing in rhythm with the flames. "And for that, they branded you tyrant among tyrants." Not accusation, but a mirror held to her own fall, the consort's blade, the council's whispers, the presumption of her death to bury their guilt. Thorn's gaze met hers across the fire, stormy depths reflecting the dance of embers, a melancholy settling like frost on his features. "Mercy is the true madness in Vargath," he replied, feeding a twig to the blaze, the wood hissing as sap wept into the heat. "It unravels the iron order they forge above. I saw his eyes, my enemies, broken not by defeat, but by the same chains that bound me. To kill him would have stained my soul blacker than the pit." His voice cracked faintly, the admission raw, vulnerability cracking the alpha's armored poise. Rowena felt it echo in her own chest, the pain of choices that isolated, the rejection that carved deeper than any claw. Her hand rose instinctively, hovering near the fire, drawn to its warmth as if to thaw the ice of years alone. The bond flickered then, not as overwhelming tide, but as a tentative ember, empathy forging links from the forge of shared wounds. A low rumble echoed from the pit's outer edges, shattering the fragile peace. The grind of chains and the guttural snarls of hounds bred in the forges, their hides laced with iron barbs. The council's hunters, shadowed enforcers dispatched to ensure the pit's inhabitants remained contained. Their raids a ritual to feed the city's insatiable hunger for control. Thorn tensed, his body coiling like a bowstring, the silver cuff on his wrist glinting as he rose. "They come," he growled, the word laced with the ferocity of one who had faced this storm before. The other alphas stirred, their eyes igniting with primal fire, forming a semicircle at the hollow's mouth, fur bristling against the encroaching chill. Rowena surged to her feet, the cloak falling open to reveal the glint of her broken crown, its twisted form catching the firelight like a defiant relic. Fear surged, but so did a fierce protectiveness for this fragile sanctuary, for the Alpha whose mercy mirrored her own silenced strength. "We stand together," she said, her voice resonant, carrying the Omega's quiet command that had once quelled rebellions. Thorn glanced at her, surprise flickering in his eyes, then nodded, a ghost of a smile touching his lips, acknowledgement of the bond solidifying, empathy hardening into alliance. The hunters breached the outer ring, their forms silhouetted against the moonlight shafts, armored betas with whips crackling with forge sparks, hounds straining at leashes that sparked against stone. Snarls erupted, the alphas lunging forward in a blur of claw and fang, the air filling with the metallic tang of blood and the acrid bite of scorched metal. Thorn fought at the forefront, his movements a lethal grace, shielding the hollow's entrance as one hound broke through, its jaws snapping toward Rowena. She dodged, heart pounding, grabbing a loose shard of iron from the ground, improvised blade in hand, and drove it into the beast's flank. Hot blood spraying across her skin, sticky and warm against the cold. The skirmish raged visceral and brief, weavos piercing the din, bodies thudding against rock, the fire's glow staining the snow-dusted floor in crimson streaks. Thorn dispatched the last hunter with a roar that shook the walls, his chest heaving, a gash across his shoulder weeping red. He turned to her, eyes locking in the aftermath's hush, the bond thrumming stronger now, fear transmuted to trust, curiosity to the first stirrings of something deeper, unnameable. Rowena wiped the blood from her hands, the sigils on her spine ablaze with heat, as if the Deusa approved this union forged in defense. Yet doubt lingered, a shadow in her mind. Was this refuge a true haven, or merely a deeper pit, where vulnerability invited the blade anew? As the echoes faded, the wind above sighing like a weary sentinel, Rowena met his gaze across the bloodied furs. Strength, she pondered silently, was not in the claw's strike, but in choosing to shield the broken. The fire crackled on, a beacon in the dark, illuminating the path they now walked together, toward redemption or ruin. The fire's embers pulsed like a faltering heart in the hollow's dim embrace, casting wavering shadows that licked at the blood-streaked stone. Rowena knelt beside Thorn, the metallic tang of the skirmish clinging to her skin, mingling with the earthy musk of his fur as she tore a strip from her cloak to bind his shoulder. The gash wept crimson, hot and insistent, soaking the fabric before she could staunch it, a reminder that even in victory, the pit exacted its toll. His breath came ragged, each exhale stirring the air between them, but his stormy eyes held hers with a steadiness that unraveled her guarded poise. The other alphas had withdrawn to the periphery, their forms slumped in exhausted vigil, whines softening into the drip of condensation from the arched ceiling. The wind tunneled through the fissure above, a mournful howl that carried the faint, acrid smoke of Vargath's distant forges, as if the city itself conspired to intrude upon their fragile peace. She tied the knot with deliberate care, her fingers brushing the heat of his flesh, igniting that instinctive pull once more, a Omega's quiet yearning against an Alpha's unyielding storm. Empathy had woven them closer in the fray, transforming fear into shared resolve, but now, in the hush, doubt crept like frost along her spine. The sigils there throbbed, not with warning, but with an insistent rhythm, as if awakening from dormancy, their ancient patterns tracing paths unseen. Rowena had always dismissed them as relics of a queen's folly, marks burned in a lunar rite she barely remembered from her youth, whispers of the Deuce's favor, granting sight to the Forsaken. But in the Undercity's isolation, they had lain dormant, silent witnesses to her survival, until now. Thorn's hand covered hers, rough and calloused, halting her motion. "You fight like one born to lead, not follow," he murmured, his voice a low thunder laced with wonder, the silver cuff on his wrist catching the fire's glow like a captured moonbeam. Pain etched his features, but beneath it lay a melancholy curiosity, the curse's visions flickering in his gaze like half-formed prophecies. He had seen fragments in the battle's chaos, her form a beacon amid the snarls, the sigils flaring as she struck the hound, guiding his own strikes with uncanny precision. Not mere instinct, but something deeper, a thread pulling the frayed edges of fate into alignment. Rowena withdrew her hand, the broken crown shifting against her chest like a concealed blade, its jagged points a prick against her resolve. "Survival is no leadership," she replied, her tone edged with the bitterness of years silenced, though her pulse betrayed the lie. The air grew thicker, charged with the scent of smoldering lichen and the faint ozone bite of impending revelation. She rose, pacing the hollow's confines, the cold stone leaching warmth from her boots. The moonlight through the fissure had shifted, spilling silver across the floor in elongated veins, illuminating the crimson smears like veins of ore in Vargath's depths. Her mind raced, rationalizing the bond as mere alliance, a desperate weave against the Council's iron grip. Love? No. That was a throne she had long forsaken, its weight too heavy for the exiled. Yet as she turned, a vision seized her, not a dream, but a clarity sharp as shattered ice. The sigils ignited, heat blooming across her back like liquid fire, forcing a gasp from her lips. The world tilted, colors bleeding into symbols, paths unfurled before her inner eye, glowing threads weaving through the pit's labyrinth, hidden tunnels veined with moonlight, leading not to death but to forgotten exits beneath the city. One thread pulsed brighter, crimson-tinged, converging on Thorn. His curse, she saw, was no madness but a shattered oracle, visions fragmented by guilt. Her gift, the Pathfinder's sight, could mend it, align the paths of the mad alphas, revealing the Council's betrayals, forging a destiny where mercy crowned the fallen. The Deuce's lineage stirred within her, Omega blood sovereign and guiding, not in dominance, but in revelation, turning exile into the key that unlocked chains. She staggered, clutching the wall, the vision's weight crashing like a blizzard's fury. Thorn was at her side in an instant, his arm encircling her waist, steadying her against the onslaught. His touch grounded the torrent, the alpha's heat a counter to the ethereal chill of sight. "What do you see?" he demanded, urgency threading his growl, his free hand hovering near her back as if sensing the sigils blaze through the cloak. The other alphas stirred, their eyes gleaming with feral intuition, the air humming with the low vibration of weavos held in check. Rowena met his gaze, storm-gray eyes wide with the truth's burden. "Paths," she whispered, the word tasting of blood and moonlight, her voice resonant with the Deuce's echo. "Yours, ours. The curse twists your visions, but I can unweave it, show the way through the iron lies above, the sigils. They mark me as Pathfinder, born to guide the broken to redemption." The revelation hung between them, visceral as the blood drying on her hands, her hidden gift manifesting not in glory but in quiet certainty. Thorn's expression fractured, guilt's shadows yielding to awe, realization dawning that she was no mere survivor but the inevitable force the moon had ordained. His hand tightened on her waist, the bond surging, resisted no longer but embraced as destiny's forge. Yet with sight came the dilemma's sting. To reveal the paths meant exposing her fully, risking the Council's wrath anew, binding her freedom to his redemption. Was compassion a crown or a noose? The fire spat embers, the wind howled its ancient query, and in Thorn's eyes she saw the question mirrored. Would he claim this key, or let the paths dissolve into the pit's eternal dark? The moonlight waned, leaving them in fire-lit vigil, the weight of choice settling like snow upon the soul. Subscribe if you believe mercy can crown even the fallen. Comment Luna if you'd walk through the storm for someone who saw your... The fisher's silver light had ebbed to a mere thread, leaving the hollow bathed in the fire's reluctant glow, where shadows clung like unspoken regrets to the bloodied stone. Rowena's vision lingered in her veins, a spectral map etched in moonlight and fire, pulling her inexorably toward the confrontation she had evaded for years. Thorn's arm remained a steady anchor at her waist, his heat seeping through the cloak's tatters. But the Pathfinder's sight revealed no gentle paths, only jagged forks leading to the heart of Vargath's iron deceit. The sigils on her spine cooled to a dull ache, as if sated by their awakening. Yet the weight of what they unveiled pressed heavier than the broken crown against her chest. Freedom, she realized, was no longer solitude's illusion. It was the choice to wield this gift, to bind her fate to his, or shatter it against the Council's unyielding forge. Thorn's gaze bore into hers, stormy depths churning with the fragments of his curse, visions that had once driven him to the pit's madness, now sharpened by her revelation. "The paths you see, they lead to them," he said, his voice a gravel whisper laced with the wind's distant moan, rising to draw the other alphas closer. Their forms gathered, hulking silhouettes etched in ember light, eyes gleaming with the feral spark of purpose rekindled. The air thickened with their collective breath, steaming plumes that carried the raw scent of earth and restrained fury, the pit's chill yielding to the heat of impending storm. Rowena nodded, the motion deliberate, her storm-gray eyes reflecting the flame's crimson dance. The bond thrummed between them, no longer resisted but tempered by the moral precipice ahead. To forgive the betrayers above or unleash war's crimson tide upon the iron city that had presumed her dead. They moved as one, the alphas fanning out like shadows unbound, their footfalls a muffled thunder on the scree-strewn floor. Thorn led, his scarred frame cutting through the gloom, the silver cuff on his wrist a glinting talisman of lost royalty. Rowena followed, the broken crown's jagged edges biting her skin with each step, a visceral reminder of the throne room's fall, the consort's blade, the council's venomous whispers, the rival alpha who had orchestrated it all from the fringes of power. Eric Stormclaw, once her ally in the outer packs, now the council's shadowed enforcer, his ambition a poison that had toppled her reign and exiled Thorn for his mercy. The Pathfinder's sight guided them now, threads of light invisible to all but her, weaving through hidden tunnels that snaked upward from the pit, veins of forgotten stone laced with moonlight's subtle glow. The ascent was a trial of breath and resolve, the air growing heavier with the acrid bite of forge smoke filtering through cracks, the distant clamor of hammers a mechanical dirge that mocked their primal advance. Rowena's lungs burned, each inhalation drawing in the metallic tang of Vargath's underbelly. But the sigils pulsed in rhythm with her heart, illuminating the path's twists, avoiding collapse-prone shafts, skirting patrols whose boots echoed like judgments from above. Thorn glanced back often, his expression a mask of melancholy, etched deeper by guilt's unrelenting carve. "This confronts not just them," he murmured during a brief halt in a narrow crevice, where bioluminescent fungi cast their blue haze over sweat-slicked fur. "But us. My mercy spared Eirik once. Yours could end him. What price for redemption if it demands blood?" She met his eyes, the question slicing through her like winter's gale, stirring the Omega's quiet fury against the Alpha's burdened storm. Love or liberty? The choice loomed, not as abstract philosophy, but as the hot spill of blood on her hands from the hound's flank, echoed now in the potential flood ahead. Forgiveness might crown them in the Deuce's light, weaving mercy into sovereignty. But war promised the raw justice her scars craved, freedom bought in the tyrant's fall. The broken crown pressed insistently, its iron whisper urging her toward the ladder, yet the bond with thorn tugged otherwise, a thread of compassion that resisted the blade's easy arc. Strength is choosing the path that heals, not destroys, she replied, her voice resonant in the confined space, though doubt coiled in her gut like the pit's serpentine shadows. The alphas rumbled agreement, their whines a chorus of shared exile, but the air hummed with the tension of beasts leashed by a queen's unproven will. They emerged through a rusted grate into the Undercity's fringes, where Vargath's labyrinth sprawled in perpetual dusk, spiked alleys choked with snow-dusted refuse, the wind howling through vented spires like weavos of the damned. Moonlight clawed across the grated walkways, silvering the iron veins that pulsed with the city's lifeblood, and there, in the throne chamber's antechamber, the confrontation ignited. Eric Stormclaw stood amid his beta guards, his form a tower of fur and steel-plated hide, eyes like forged obsidian gleaming with triumphant malice. Flanked by the council's remnants, those same whispering traitors who had poisoned her cup and presumed her corpse, he laughed, a guttural bark that echoed off the stone. "The ghost rises with the mad dog," he snarled, claws extending as his pack circled, their breaths steaming in the chill. The air thick with the scent of oiled weapons and impending violence. Thorn lunged first, a blur of gray fury, clashing with Eric in a whirlwind of fang and claw that shook the gratings, blood spraying in crimson arcs that caught the moonlight like rubies scattered by the Deuce's hand. The alphas poured forth, a tide of primal rage against the beta's disciplined steel, the chamber erupting in visceral chaos, bodies thudding against walls, weavos piercing the din, the metallic screech of blades on armor mingling with the wet rip of flesh. Rowena wove through the fray, the Pathfinder's sight a blazing compass, directing Thorn's strikes with whispered urgencies. "Left now!" her voice cutting through the storm like lunar silver. She faced a counselor, the one whose whispers had sealed her fate, his dagger flashing toward her throat. With sigil-fueled clarity, she sidestepped, driving her elbow into his windpipe, the crack resounding as he crumpled, his eyes widening in recognition of the queen they had buried. Eric broke free, pinning Thorn against a pillar, his jaws inches from the throat, but Rowena's cry halted them both. "Enough!" The word thundered, resonant with sovereign blood, the sigils flaring hot enough to illuminate her cloak's fall, revealing the broken crown in her grasp, held not as weapon, but emblem. The chamber stilled, breaths ragged, blood pooling in dark rivulets across the frost-kissed floor. Eric's gaze locked on the sigils bared by her torn garb, recognition dawning like a curse unveiled. "Pathfinder," he hissed, releasing Thorn with a shove, his form trembling not in fear, but in the inevitability her presence evoked. The rival alpha, once spared by mercy, now faced the moral crux. His betrayal, a chain forged in ambition, her gift, the key to its breaking. Rowena stepped forward, the broken crown extended, its jagged form catching the moonlight in prismatic shards. Thorn rose beside her, wounded but unbowed, his hand brushing hers, a silent vow amid the carnage. "You chose power over pack," she said to Eric, her tone laced with the tragedy of lost kinship, the wind above moaning like the Deuce's lament. "But redemption waits for those who kneel to truth." The choice burned in her chest. Forgive this traitor, bind love's fragile liberty to Thorn's side, and weave war into peace. Or unleash the alpha's fury, claiming freedom in vengeance's cold embrace. Eric's eyes flickered, guilt's shadow warring with pride, and in that suspended breath the chamber held, the moon's gaze eternal judge to the soul's unraveling trial. Blood and fire whispered their counsel, but the heart's decree remained her own, a queen's mercy poised on war's razor edge. The chamber's frost-veined air hung thick with the aftermath's metallic reek, blood pooling in irregular patterns that mirrored the jagged paths Rowena's sight had unveiled, crimson rivers forking toward mercy or vengeance, each droplet a silent vote in the unfolding trial. Irik's obsidian eyes narrowed, the rival Alpha's massive frame heaving with the labored breaths of one cornered, not by claw, but by the inexorable weight of his own ambition. The betas lay scattered, their armored forms twisted in unnatural stillness, while the mad Alphas formed a bristling perimeter, their low growls a undercurrent to the wind's relentless howl through the grated spires above. Thorn stood at her side, his wounded shoulder seeping fresh warmth against her arm, the silver cuff on his wrist a cool counterpoint to the heat radiating from his guarded form. The bond between them pulsed like the fire's dying embers in the pit, a steady rhythm that anchored her amid the chaos, yet it amplified the dilemma's sting. To extend forgiveness would weave their fates into a tapestry of fragile peace, binding love's liberty to the very pack that had shattered her. War, however, promised the raw catharsis her scars demanded, freedom etched in the traitor's blood, untainted by compromise. Rowena's grip tightened on the broken crown, its twisted iron biting into her palm, drawing a thin line of her own blood that trickled warm down her wrist, a visceral echo of the consort's blade long years ago, when trust had curdled into betrayal. The sigils on her spine flared anew, not in guidance, but in warning, their heat spreading like liquid moonlight through her veins, illuminating the chamber's shadows with inner clarity. She saw it all. Irik's path, forked and frayed, leading back to the night he had spared Thorn's mercy only to twist it into his ascent, whispering poisons into the council's ears, presuming her death to consolidate his iron throne. His eyes flickered again, guilt's shadow deepening the lines etched by relentless winters, a mirror to Thorn's melancholy, both Alphas marked by choices that isolated, yet one had embraced savagery while the other clung to compassion's edge. "Kneel," she commanded, her voice emerging not as a queen's decree, but as the Deusa's resonant whisper carrying the Omega's quiet sovereignty that quelled storms. The word wove through the tension, stirring the air like a gust off glacial peaks, and the chamber fell into a profound silence, broken only by the distant clang of Vargath's hammers, indifferent to the souls unraveling below. Irik's claws retracted fractionally, his posture shifting from predatory coil to a hesitant crouch, the moonlight spilling through a high vent to silver his fur, highlighting the scars of battles he had won through deceit. "You presume to judge me, Ghost Queen?" he snarled, though the venom lacked its earlier bite, laced instead with the tremor of inevitability. His gaze darted to Thorn, the spared rival whose mercy now stood as living accusation, then back to her sigils, bared and glowing like brands of lunar judgment. The Pathfinder's sight pierced deeper, revealing the fractures in his resolve, visions of his own pack's fall if war erupted, the Iron City's spires crumbling under the Alpha's unified fury, contrasted with the hollow throne awaiting if he yielded. Rowena stepped closer, the broken crown extended like an olive branch forged in fire, its blood-smeared points catching the light in accusatory gleams. Empathy warred within her, unbidden and sharp. The pain of rejection she knew too well, the shame of exile that had driven her to silence, now reflected in this tyrant's faltering pride. But forgiveness was no balm. It demanded sacrifice. Her freedom bartered for the pack's fragile unity, love with Thorn a crown shared in the shadow of past blades. Thorn's hand brushed hers, a subtle pressure that grounded the whirlwind in her chest, his stormy eyes meeting hers with unspoken plea. The curse's fragment stirred in him too, sharpened by her gift. He saw the paths converging, redemption not in conquest, but in the choice to heal the wounds they all bore. "End it with blood, and we become the monsters they named us," he murmured, low enough for her ears alone, his breath warm against the chill that seeped from the stone. Yet his melancholy deepened the lines of his face, Guilt's eternal carve, reminding her of his own spared mercy, the rival he had let live, only for it to ignite this very inferno. The alphas shifted restlessly, their whines rising like a chorus of the forsaken, the air thickening with the primal scent of anticipation, fur and blood mingling in a heady fog. Rowena's heart thundered, the Omega's instinct pulling toward the bond's warmth, rationalizing war as the easier path. Strike now. Claim the throne's remnants. Liberate the pit's shadows without the noose of pardon. But the sigils burned hotter, urging the harder truth, compassion as the true power, turning betrayal's blade inward to forge something unyielding. Eric rose slowly, his form towering yet diminished, the moonlight etching his silhouette in stark relief against the chamber's iron walls. "I knelt to no one," he growled. But the words fractured, his eyes locking on the broken crown as if it held the ghosts of his ambition's cost. In that suspended breath, Rowena made her choice, not with roar or blade, but with the quiet resolve of one reborn in exile's forge. She lowered the crown, letting it clatter to the frost-kissed floor, the sound echoing like a vow shattered and remade. "Then kneel to yourself," she said, her tone laced with the tragedy of paths untaken, stepping forward to press her palm against his chest, where his heart battered like a caged storm. The touch ignited the sigil's final surge, a wave of lunar clarity flooding him, visions of the Deuce's weave, showing the pack's renaissance under mercy's crown, not iron's fist. Eric staggered, a guttural whine escaping as tears, rare for an alpha, glistened in his eyes, the weight of inevitability bowing his knees at last. The chamber exhaled, the alpha's growls softening to murmurs of awe, Thorn's arm encircling her waist in silent triumph, the bond solidifying into something profound. Love accepted not as reward, but as the redemption's proof. Yet victory's aftertaste was bittersweet, freedom's illusion pierced by the knowledge that forgiveness bound them all, her to the pack's mending, Thorn to the curse's lift, Eric to atonement's yoke. The wind howled above, carrying the moon's approving sigh, but in Rowena's soul the dilemma lingered. Had she chosen healing, or merely delayed war's crimson dawn? The broken crown lay between them, a symbol reforged in blood and light, whispering of rebirth's fragile dawn as the first stirrings of unity rippled through the iron-veined heart of Vargath. The chamber's iron walls seemed to exhale with the weight of bowed heads, the moonlight filtering through the vents like a benediction long withheld, silvering the bloodied floor where the broken crown lay fractured yet unbroken. Rowena's palm lingered against Eric's chest, the alpha's heartbeat a thunderous echo beneath her touch, raw and humbled, the visions she had unleashed weaving through him like threads of lunar silk, unraveling the knots of ambition that had chained his soul. His knees met the frost-kissed stone with a thud that reverberated through the silence, not in defeat, but in the shattering of pride's illusion, tears carving clean paths through the grime on his furred cheeks. The mad alphas, now no longer mad but awakened, shifted closer, their whines softening to a harmonious rumble, the air thick with the mingled scents of sweat-soaked earth, cooling blood, and the faint, purifying ozone of the Deuce's grace. Thorn's arm around her waist tightened, his heat a steady forge against the chill that still clawed at her bones, the bond between them no longer a tentative ember, but a flame tempered in the crucible of choice. Yet as Eric rose unsteadily, his obsidian eyes meeting hers with the hollow gaze of one reborn from exile's abyss, Rowena felt the sacrifice carve into her like winter's first bite. Forgiveness was no gentle thaw. It demanded her solitude's surrender, the queen's isolation she had worn as armor for years, now stripped away to bind her to this fractured pack. The sigils on her spine cooled to a resonant hum, their heat ebbing like a tide retreating from jagged shores, leaving her exposed, not to blades, but to the vulnerability of unity. She withdrew her hand, the broken crown's blood-smeared points glinting in the dim light, and knelt to retrieve it, the iron's jagged embrace familiar against her palm, a symbol reforged not in glory, but in the quiet yielding of power to compassion. "Rise," she whispered, her voice resonant with the Omega's unyielding sovereignty, carrying the weight of paths chosen and forsaken. Eric obeyed. His form diminished, yet liberated, the rival Alpha turning to Thorn with a nod heavy as ancient oaths, mercy's echo, full circle in the moon's watchful gaze. The wind howled through the spires above, a mournful weevo that stirred the snow-dusted gratings, carrying flakes that danced like spectral witnesses into the chamber. Thorn pulled her closer, his scarred fingers tracing the edge of her cloak where it had torn, revealing the sigil's intricate whorls now faintly luminous, as if the Dusa had etched them anew in silver ink. His stormy eyes held hers, melancholy yielding to a profound tenderness born of shared redemption, the curse's fragments dissolving in the clarity her gift had bestowed. "You chose healing over the blade," he murmured, his breath warm against her temple, laced with the pine resin of his essence and the faint char of battle's aftermath. No immediate passion surged between them. Love resisted still, rationalized as duty's forge, yet accepted in the bone-deep certainty that their union was the Deusa's weave, Omega and Alpha entwined not in dominance, but in mutual rebirth. She leaned into him. The broken crown pressed between them, like a vow sealed in iron and blood, its weight a bridge from rejection's void to this fragile dawn. The pack gathered, Eric at their fore, the Alpha's forms a circle of shadowed loyalty under the moonlight's deepening veil. Vargath's underbelly stirred with the first tremors of change, the distant hammers falling silent, as if the city's mechanical heart sensed the shift below. Rowena's Pathfinder's sight unfurled one final vision, paths converging not in war's crimson flood, but in a tapestry of mended chains, the iron spires yielding to lunar rites, the pit's exiles rising as guardians of a realm where mercy crowned the fallen. Yet the dilemma lingered, a spiritual thorn in her soul. Had she truly claimed freedom, or sacrificed it on compassion's altar? Faith against despair. The Deusa's symbols whispered of rebirth, but the scars on her back ached with the memory of blades turned by those now kneeling. Strength, she pondered in the introspective hush, was not the roar of conquest, but the quiet choice to heal what power sought to break, turning blood's stain into light's reflection. They ascended as one, the hidden tunnels yielding to her guidance, moonlight shafts piercing the gloom like arrows of approval. Emerging into the throne room proper, where the council's remnants awaited in stunned vigil, whispers dying on their lips at the sight of the presumed dead queen flanked by tyrants turned allies. The air crackled with visceral tension. Snow swirled through cracked arches, frosting the marble where her blood had once pooled, now cleansed by time's indifferent hand. Rowena stepped forward, the broken crown raised not as scepter, but as emblem of renaissance, her voice cutting through the frost like a blade of pure silver. The Deusa weaves no chains of iron, only threads of sovereign blood. The words ignited the chamber. The pack's weavos rising in a symphony that shook the spires, Eric's growl joining Thorn's in harmonious thunder, the bond with her Alpha sealing in that moment of collective awakening, love's proof, redemption's fire kindled from despair's ashes. Vargath transformed in the moon's ascent, its iron heart softening under the weight of unity, the exile's rebirth a beacon against the eternal winter. Rowena stood at Thorn's side on the dais, the sigil's hum a lullaby in her veins, the broken crown refitted upon a throne remade from fragments. Suffering had forged them, choice had bound them, and in union they found not reward, but the profound truth. Power's true measure lay in lifting the fallen, turning betrayal's wound into the realm's enduring light. The wind sighed its final howl, The fire of forges rekindled as hearths of healing, and beneath the lunar gaze, the queen's silence shattered no more, echoing instead with the promise of paths eternal. If your heart beat alongside ours, like, comment, and subscribe, because every soul that joins our moon keeps the flame of redemption alive.